Hi, I'm Bob Burg, and you're listening to The Recognized Authority with Alastair McDermott.
Welcome to The Recognized Authority, a podcast that helps specialized consultants and domain experts on your journey to become known as an authority in your field. Here is your host, Alastair McDermott.
And I'm delighted to say that today my guest is Bob Burg. Bob, you are probably very well known by most people listening to this, but can you just give a brief overview of who you are and what you do and some of the books? Because I know people will recognize the books that you've written.
Probably the most recognizable books would be the Go-Giver series that is authored with John David Mann. I had a book out years ago called Endless Referrals. Subtitle was Network Your Everyday Contacts into Sales. So a lot of people kind of from way back in the day of sales will remember that one.
My last interview was interesting. So this is episode 134 of The Recognized Authority.
Wow.
Episode 133 was an AI-generated fake interviewer who doesn't exist, interviewing a fake me who spoke with my voice. So can you tell me, how do listeners know that you're the real Bob Burg and Alastair isn't just making this up?
Well, I don't actually know. The machine is getting away from me.
It's really interesting, this world that we're in now, isn't it? When we've got to actually think about things like this.
Yeah, isn't that funny? But yeah, it's probably not funny because it can happen. So and I think people will keep pushing the envelope and experimenting with that and doing that. So I think in a sense, the way people will know, to the degree that we can know anything 100%, for sure, I think it will be because you've built up a reputation.
Yes.
As being someone who wouldn't do that unless you were telling people you were doing that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
that's
about the best way to know.
And I guess that's kind of the premise of this whole show, is building yourself up as as somebody trustworthy and credible, and becoming known as a trustworthy authority in your field. And I guess the trustworthiness isn't necessarily tied to the authority part, or maybe it is. That's something that maybe we could talk about.
It depends what kind of authority, because if you've got positional authority, no, it's not. If you've got moral authority, sure, it is. So, so having a title, which is positional authority, that doesn't guarantee anyone any, influence in terms of other people. It doesn't give someone any sort of respect necessarily, you know what I'm saying, other than through compliance that someone has to respect the fact they have to listen to you or they could be fired, right? But as far as positional authority goes, no. Moral authority is the authority that we want to have. And when I say moral authority, I don't mean moral as far as religiously or something like that. I mean in terms of having character that people are going to respect you for that. They're going to know who you are. They're going to know who you are about. And when we have that, I think Aristotle said character might be said to be the most valuable influencer of all, or persuader of all. And I messed up that quote, but basically that is what it is. That when you have character and you are known for that high character, you're as influential and persuasive as you can be. Right.
And this is interesting because I was just talking about another Greek philosopher on the show. I was talking about Socrates and the Socratic method, the Socratic questioning, because I find that's quite useful in various things, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit. But yeah, it's and the differentiation between positional authority and moral authority, the kind of authority that I'm talking about here on this show has always been maybe a type of moral authority, but it's talking about creating. It's not bestowed upon you by, well, in a way it is. It's not bestowed upon you by a structure. It's bestowed upon you by an audience, and they decide. Way to put it. Yeah.
The marketplace decides, exactly.
The marketplace decides, yeah. So, okay, so there's a lot of different things I want to talk to you about. One of those is, so I really genuinely love helping people, and it's one of the things that motivates me. But I've often thought that maybe that generosity, and this is something that you've thought a lot about because of your books. I've often thought about generosity is enlightened self-interest, and therefore also maybe mercenary. So I'm just wondering what you think about that. Like, does the fact that I know that helping people is going to be in my best interest, does that make that a little bit mercenary, or is, is like, can you square that circle for me?
Sure. I think the biggest challenge is that we as part of our belief system as a society, we operate out of a duality. So it's you're either this or that. You're either just a selfless giver who, just wants to do good for others, or you're some greedy, horrible, whatever. And, I don't buy into that. I think it's a treacherous dichotomy, or what we would call a false dilemma, the unnecessary use of the word or. It's like when I don't know if they ask this question across the pond, but when we're little kids, people would used to ask, when you grow up, do you want to be wealthy or happy? Right? And that's a false dichotomy, right? Well, the answer is yes.
That's a cruel question to ask a kid.
Well, it is. It's a horrible question to ask a kid, because what it says is there's a duality. You can either be wealthy or you can be happy, right? And so I would look at the same thing in terms of giving and receiving. I think as a human being, first of all, I think it's an aspect. There's two aspects of human nature here we're talking about. One is we do have self-interest. We are self-interested as a species. It's how we have passed along our genes from one generation to another. It's not something to necessarily deny, although I think it's something that we can put aside, right? And we can consciously not let control us. So, but that is one aspect of human nature. But another aspect is we want to do good for others. We want to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. We want to feel as though we're contributing, that we're providing value to others. That's just as much a part of human nature. So I'd rather look at it as just one continuous, when we talk about in the Go-Giver, the law of receptivity, right? We talk about breathing out and breathing in. It's not just one or the other. It's both. You breathe out, you breathe in. You breathe out carbon dioxide, you breathe in oxygen. You breathe out, which is giving. You breathe in, which is... So I'd rather look at it that way and say, when we give to others, yeah, we probably are, when we do this authentically, when we do it from our heart, when we do it as a way to bring value to another person. And we also know that as we do this, we are creating that benevolent context for our own success. So I'm very happy with enlightened self-interest. I have no issue with that term.
Okay, you mentioned authenticity there, and just to quote, so for anybody who hasn't read the book, your law of authenticity is the most valuable gift you have to offer is yourself. Can you tell us a little bit about how you think about that, particularly in the context of somebody who is trying to do sales and is trying to position themselves as an authority in the marketplace?
Yeah. Let's go a little deep into that, because it's really, as we know, the word authenticity has become a very overused word. It's really become a buzzword, right? You hear it all the time. What does it really mean? So first, before we even define it, let's look at what we're talking about in the story. That was the part where Deborah Davenport was sharing a very important lesson, and that is that all the skills in the world, the sales skills, technical skills, people skills, as important as they are, and they are all indeed very important, they're also all for naught if you don't come at it from your true, authentic core. But when you do, when you show up as yourself day after day, week after week, month after month, people feel good about you. They feel great about you. They feel very comfortable with you. They feel safe with you. And why wouldn't they? They know who they're getting. Okay, this is very important. Again, we go back to human nature. We want to, as human beings, we want to understand our world. This in a world that is often hard to understand. We crave consistency in a world which is often very inconsistent. We all know those people who are one way one day, and the next time you see them, they're like a totally different person. And wow, that's difficult to be able to deal with a person like that. So when we show up consistently, right, day after day, week after week, month after month, right, the trust is able to be established. right? People, they know, again, they know who they're getting. This is very, very important. So let's now look at what do we mean by authenticity? Well, I would define authenticity as acting congruently with one's values. Okay, that's authenticity. See, I think authenticity has taken on almost a new meaning. And you see this, and I think this has really come about since social media, more than anything else, where authenticity is sort of looked at as having no boundaries. Just say or do whatever you want, whatever comes to mind, whatever it is, because, it may be rude, it may be crude, it may be insulting, but it's authentic. So that's okay. That trumps everything, right? I disagree with that. This would be like the person who says, well, I have anger issues and I yell a lot and I yell at people a lot. And if I were to act any differently, that wouldn't be authentic of me. Well, that's hogwash. That's nonsense. It simply means this person has an authentic problem that they need to authentically work on in order to become a better, higher, authentic version of themselves, a more effective, authentic version of themselves. So I don't think authenticity should ever be used as an excuse for not growing, because that's just who I am, take it or leave it. That is not a productive philosophy for life or for business. So no, authenticity doesn't mean you have no boundaries. It means that you are acting congruently with your highest values.
One of the things that you mentioned there was day after day, week after week, month after month, and you're talking about consistency. Why is that consistency so important in this whole sphere?
Well, it's hardwired into us as human beings that we crave it. It's very, when you don't know what to expect, that's a horrible way to right to operate. We want to kind of know as much as possible. Now, certainty is not possible. We never can be really certain of anything. But what that consistency does is it communicates as much certainty as possible. Mm-hmm. So, it's sort of like, when we talk about, I often talk about with hotels. I use the Ritz-Carlton as an example of, a wonderful culture where when the guests contact employees greet you, it's never hi, hey, or how you doing. It's always good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. It doesn't matter where it is, what the country is, everywhere, right? It's consistent. When you need them for something, not only will they put down what they're doing in order to help you, but when you thank them, they will never respond with, no problem, no, it's always my pleasure, okay? Now, they do this consistently. Every time, no exceptions, no excuses. Then I talk about other hotels that are excellent properties, okay, whether it's the Westin or the Hyatt or the Marriott or many others, wonderful properties. And they do that same thing sometimes, but not all the time. It's not consistent. Now, that might not be something that bothers anyone. That's what they call first world problem, right? But when we're talking about consistency, that is a separator. That is a distinguisher from everyone else. Because it's one thing to be excellent, okay? It's one thing to be excellent. It's another thing to be excellent consistently.
Very interesting. And I suppose that they also would not be noteworthy to you if they didn't do it consistently. I mean, you wouldn't have mentioned them in your book, right?
Right. Well, exactly. I think that's a great point.
Okay. So what else should I be thinking about in terms of authenticity as I'm on this route to authority and I want to become known as a recognized authority in my field? What are the things that somebody like me should be thinking about in terms of authenticity?
I think it's continuing to learn, continuing to grow, studying others, tapping into their wisdom, okay? But adapting their wisdom, but not adopting their personality. And this is something we see a lot of these days, where, people see someone who has been successful, so they actually imitate the person's style rather than simply adapting the great wisdom they may have learned from that person, right? So it ends up that they're not really being themselves. They're trying to be someone else, and most people cannot pull that off, right? It's very difficult to consistently and sustainably be someone who you're not. But we can
Yeah,
learn from everyone. Absolutely. Learn from all others, adapt their wisdom, but stay true to your authentic core.
I had a conversation I think is on point for this morning with a coaching client of mine, and we were talking about the use of I versus we, because so I've been in business for about 16 or 17 years now, and when I started out, I always would use the word we on my website and everywhere else, even though it was just me. And I did that because I wanted to present as a bigger company, but I always felt a bit cheap or something. And I eventually got to the point where I was confident enough to say I and own that. And then lo and behold, I actually started to build a small
Right.
team
Isn't that
behind me.
funny how
And
that
so,
works? Yeah.
but yeah, just I think giving people permission to say things like I and own it, and you know that's okay. I think that's giving yourself permission to do that. You know, that just strikes me as something that's in line with what you were talking about here.
Yeah, and again, I think it always goes back to one's values. What is it that they value? Because it's very difficult to feel good about oneself when we're not acting congruently with our values.
Yeah, and I could see the relief and feel it in her voice when I was talking to her this morning. So yeah, okay, so let's talk about some of the questions. I was talking about Socratic questioning and methodology, and I know that you have like the way you think about questions a lot. You have a type of question that you talk about called feel good questions. Can you tell me a little bit about those? Because I'm kind of, this is in self-interest for me as well as a podcast interviewer. I'm interested in knowing some things about that as well. So how do you feel, or how do you think about feel good questions?
Yeah, well, so feel good questions are simply meant as a way when you meet someone new to be able to very quickly and genuinely establish a rapport with this person. Now, many people think that in a situation where they meet someone new, that they've got to come across as, really knowledgeable and this and that and talk about their business and how it, and, my suggestion is that if you really want to establish a great rapport with another person and create the beginnings of a possible relationship with that person, what you want to do is focus on them, not on yourself. And we've all had that, I often ask my audiences, have you ever been in a conversation with someone who let you do practically all the talking? Didn't you come away from that conversation saying to yourself, wow, what a fascinating conversationalist that person is? Right? And so you can be that fascinating conversationalist simply by asking the right questions. So I call these feel-good questions. Feel-good questions are simply questions that they're not salesy, they're not prospecty, they're not intrusive, they're not invasive. They simply just make a very natural connection with that other person. They make the person feel good about themselves, about the situation, and about you. So let's say you meet someone named Gary who sells copying machines to businesses, and the first feel-good question might be, Gary, how did you get started selling copying machines? Or you might say, how did you get started as an office products professional? In other words, how did you get your start is the question you're asking. Now, this is a question that's not particularly clever or slick, right? It's very mundane. How did you get started in your so-and-so business? But people love answering that question. Why? Because unlike everyone else they've met who is pretty much I-focused and wanting to come across talking about themselves and their business, again, which is very natural, okay, you have instead placed the focus on them. You've asked them to share their story, right? And remember, people are just generally not asked this question, right? Nobody's asking Gary how he got started as a copying machine sales professional. His own family has never asked him this question. And here's you, who he just met for the very first time, who's asking him to share his story. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one is sort of a follow-up to that, which is what do you enjoy most about what you do, or what do you enjoy most about your work? You might segue into it with, wow, you must have had some fascinating experiences. Tell me, what do you enjoy most about your work, or what do you enjoy most about what you do? Now, this is a question that is sort of flies in the face of a lot of traditional sales teaching, where we're supposed to immediately find their pain, right? So that we can come to the rescue with our fantastic products and services. But at this point, the relationship hasn't been established. There's no relationship there, and so the best thing to do is right now, rather than trying to find his pain, find his joy, because we want this person to feel good about themselves and good about us. So, what do you enjoy most about what you do? Now, I have several other questions. I have 10 feel-good questions all together. People can actually get those at burg.com/1010Q, 10 questions, if they'd like. But you'll never have time to ask any more than 2 or 3 of these questions during any one conversation. Now, then there's what we call the one key question that will separate or distinguish you from the rest. This is typically asked only after that initial rapport has been established, after asking a couple of the feel-good questions. And that question is this: Gary, how can I know if someone I'm speaking with would be a good client for you? Janet, that's fascinating what you do. Let me ask, how can I know if someone I'm speaking with is a good client potentially for you, however you want to word it. A good lead into that, a good way to frame that, is to say, Patricia, I always enjoy connecting good people with other good people. Tell me, how can I know if someone I'm speaking with is a good prospective customer for you? Okay, so these are just feel-good questions. Now, other feel-good questions might be asking them about their family or their recreational activities, which people usually love talking about, or the special work they do, such as charities or what have you. So, in other words, it's really what it comes down to is focusing on the other person and focusing on what interests them, not what interests us. What interests us is, in this case, what interests them.
So maybe a follow-on question, because I know this follows on from that a little bit, but also a lot more some of the other things that you talk about in terms of giving, in terms of sales conversations. It sounds to me like asking those kind of questions and a lot of the other things that you do in your approach to sales conversations, which we won't have time to discuss, but people can read about in your books. It sounds to me like that would take quite a lot of time. And how do you feel about that, about the fact that this is quite a slow process, potentially?
Okay. So a couple things. First, so these questions, the feel-good questions I was talking about, were not questions necessarily that you would ask in a sales conversation. This is when you just first meet someone. It takes no longer than asking any other questions. They're just a lot more effective in terms of creating the relationship. The type of questions that you will ask in a sales conversation are discovery questions, and those are the ones that are going to help you to discover what that person needs, wants, and desires, and is going to help you understand how to help them to get it. So the Go-Giver process, I would say, it actually takes a lot quicker. Is a lot quicker because what you're doing is you're establishing a relationship with this person. Now, my one thing I've said for 30 years, from my first book onto every other book I've written, I think, is what I call the golden rule of sales, and that is that all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust. And, there's no faster, more powerful, or more effective way to elicit those feelings toward you in others than by genuinely and authentically moving from that I focus or me focus to that other focus, looking to, as Sam, one of the characters in John's and my book, in the Go-Giver, advised Joe, the protege, to make your win all about the other person's win. And once that other person accepts and embraces that is you, okay, Now that's when the sale is ready to happen, assuming they need the product or service. But they will definitely know, like, and trust you and want to talk about you to others and be your personal walking ambassador.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, and maybe maybe I haven't done a good job of summarizing in that question your approach, and we won't have time to
No,
talk
you did
about
a great
now,
job.
but I know that you've done a lot of interviews where you've talked about the things that are in that book, and that's why I wanted to ask you some different things here.
Oh, sure.
There's
Whatever
one
you'd
there's
like.
one question which I guess now I'm going to have to call it a feel bad question, just in the
Okay.
context. Something I like to ask business leaders in particular is about their mistakes and failures, because I think it's really important to show, because like everybody successful has a ton of mistakes in the past. And so I
Absolutely.
like to ask, is there a business mistake or failure that you've experienced that you can tell us about that and what you learned from it?
Yeah. I mean, first, many mistakes, but one that really stands out was in the I would say more the late '90s, and this is when the internet was really starting to become a thing, and many of my clients were starting to get really into it, and I'm not a person who loves change, right? I like to get really good at something. I'm not necessarily a fast learner, but I'll stay with it till I learn it. And then once I have it, boom. And I had built a really good business, a solid business by that time. And then all of a sudden, this internet thing was happening, and I did not want to change, and I didn't change. And I thought, well, they'll stay with me and they'll do well. I'll tell you what, my business just went, and I had to basically rebuild it. I lost a lot of business because I refused to change. And of course, the lesson is you don't have to like change. I hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, change is great, change is wonderful, embrace it." Well, I don't like change. Okay, so now we don't have to like it, but we have to do it if we want the results, right?
Yeah.
And so what that said to me was, hey, you got to be ready to do what you need to do in order to have the results you want. So yeah, I've fortunately been able to work with others who are very good with technology. My business partner Kathy's fantastic with that, so she makes it very easy for me, so I can operate according to my strengths. And now the internet's a big part of my business. So it's so that's, but that was a big mistake. That was a big mistake that I learned from, that I shouldn't have had to learn from. It was something I kind of knew but ignored, and those are the worst mistakes of all.
Yes. And on that, are you thinking about AI? Like, is that something that interests you now?
So a great friend of mine, Mitch Jackson, who is an attorney, who is probably one of the best pure marketers and nicest human beings I've ever met. He is really, really into that. And he's been trying to get me to go more and more into that. And I would say this, if I was a little younger and still really active in business, I would absolutely do it, even though it's not really something I would want to do. It's something I would, in the fact that Mitch would just take me by the hand and really help me. I would totally embrace it, because I do believe it's going to be very, very important. I'm 65 years old, and I've really pulled back. I would say semi-retired, right? I'm not retired, never will, okay? But I don't think I ever will. I'm just doing more of the stuff that's fun for me, that I want to do. And so AI isn't something that it's, that for me to really, but yeah, I keep up with it, and I utilize it to the degree that I feel I need to. And again, I'm lucky to have Kathy, who's just so wonderful with technology. But yeah, I would, if I was, 10 years, if it was 10 years earlier or whatever, absolutely, I would embrace it, only because I think it's going to really come into play.
I don't have time to ask you anything else but one final question. So I want to ask you, what is the number one tip that you would give to somebody who wants to build their authority?
I would say embrace what I believe was Dale Carnegie's underlying premise in his classic How to Win Friends and Influence People. It was a great book, of course, but there was one line that I think said it all. And that was that ultimately people do things for their reasons, not our reasons. So to have the ultimate influence and authority, you've got to make it about that other person. If you're asking someone to do something, it's how does it align with that person's values? How does it help them get what they need, what they want, what they desire? How does it solve a problem or challenge of theirs? How does it bring them or move them closer to happiness? When you can be internally motivated, but outwardly focused, now I think you're, in a good position.
That's a great answer. Well, the real non-AI Bob Burg, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much. I appreciate being with you, Alastair. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Recognized Authority with Alastair McDermott. Subscribe today and don't miss an episode. Find out more at therecognizedauthority.com.